As a fitness professional, you know the joy of helping others, and you know it's more than just fitness. We're training the whole person. Wellness coaching provides expertise that goes beyond fitness and nutrition. It's a holistic approach to helping others become their best selves while reaching their goals. To us, there's no greater joy than that. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified wellness coach. Go to nasm.org/wellness.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm your host, Angie Miller, and today I want to talk about ageism. Ageism. I want to talk about challenging ageism for healthier minds and healthier bodies. And, this particular month, the month of July, it's been 11 years since my mom passed. And I think a lot about as we age throughout our society. I've always taught seniors. I have such a heart for working with older adults. And I hear so many stories about the aging process and how society views aging and how people effectively get treated throughout the aging process. So I think that ageism is prevalent in the fitness industry, but it's so pervasive throughout our society. And I want to bring it to the forefront because ageism is a prejudice. It's a form of discrimination that to me seems to go unnoticed in our society, despite the fact that there's so much research that shows that it has lasting detrimental effects on those who buy into the narrative and live by the belief that aging is negative versus something that is positive and part of life. The question I have for everyone out there is, at what point do you think it became kind of seemingly acceptable to categorize and discriminate against and stereotype groups of people simply based on their age? And for those in the fitness industry, I'd like to pause and consider, when did we start putting adults into categories based on their age rather than their ability? I, for one, think it's time to rethink classes like Fit Over 50 and Senior Sweat or 60 and Strong. I could go on and on. And I tell you what, as I get older, and aren't we all, it becomes more and more of a trigger for me when I look at some of these names and I think, so at 49 and a half, you could take regular fitness classes, but at 50, suddenly you need to go into Fit Over 50. You are no longer invited into the normal step class you've been taking for decades. So I think there's a lot of forms of ageism where we stereotype and we categorize men and women of a certain age as if age determines their physical or their mental capacity, or shall I say their lack thereof, right? So we start to think that as we age, we're just automatically going to lose our cognitive powers and our physical capacity, as if the two go hand in hand. And I am one to say, are we sure about that? Because I think that age and ability are two completely separate categories. And the way that we age is so personal and so intentional. Age depends on each individual. The way we age depends on each individual. It depends on lifestyle and decisions and genes, of course, but also choices. So my goal today is for you and I to sit down, have a cup of coffee together, and really consider, can we compassionately consider that ageism really does need to be talked about? Because we are all autonomous human beings who want to be seen and we want to be valued for who we are and how we show up, which has nothing to do with the year that we were born. The other day, true story, I'm teaching a fitness class and I'm talking about how I'm going to go to Idea World and I'm going to present about ageism, which has already happened. And I talk about that and how I talk about some of the negative repercussions of having ageist stereotypes. And a gal comes up to me and she's like, do you mind if I ask, how old are you? Okay. And then I told her my age. And she's like, "Oh, you look great and you know what's coming for your age." Which again, I'm sorry, that is one of those things that is kind of like a backhanded compliment. So I look good, but only for my age, or I just look good. And so I feel like we do that a lot. We give backhanded compliments to people and we don't mean to. I'm sure that she meant it all good. But again, age and ability are two separate categories. And so I think that we need to compassionately consider ageism, and we need to consider that the year we were born does not define our ability. So let's talk about shifting the narrative, and let's talk about, some healthy dialogue about a form of discrimination that I would venture to say is going to affect all of us someday, provided we are here to enjoy those later years. So let's think about some positive benefits of changing the way we view aging. And my goal is that if I expose some of the stereotypes and their impact on our health and well being, we can not only recognize these ageist stereotypes, we can understand more the effects, and then we can continue to create more practical strategies for these age inclusive environments. So, whether you're a fit pro or you're just somebody really interested in a healthy mind, healthy body, I think we're all here to shift the narrative. So, what is ageism? Let's start with that. So, ageism is a stereotyping, a prejudice, and discriminatory actions or attitudes based on chronological age. And that is a direct quote from a research article. Ageism is a unique form of prejudice, in that all of us, if we live long enough, will be vulnerable to its effects. We don't get to escape it. The only way to escape getting older is to not get older, right? So I'd rather take the alternative of, hey, no matter your age, whether you're 18 or you're 58, you are going to get older. So ageist practices can lead to these negative assumptions and behaviors that we employ when we're communicating with older adults. So some of the things that I notice that people do when they're talking with older adults, and, again, I teach older adults and I train older adults. And one of the things that they do is they talk baby talk, and like they're talking to a baby. And they use that kind of sweet voice that you would use if you were talking to a baby. Or maybe they talk super loud, almost like they're shouting, assuming that every person of a certain age has a hearing deficit. Or they're almost like condescending in the way that they talk, like, "Oh, you poor thing. You probably don't understand." Or some people, another assumption or behavior when communicating with older adults is some people actually just fear older adults. It's like they think they're going to get a disease or something if they hang out with them, so they try to avoid them completely. Or some people just do so much for people as they age because they just have this assumption that they can't do it on their own. So they create this kind of learned helplessness or this dependency. So think about when you're raising kids, the more you do for them, the less they do for themselves. Same thing with a partner. If you're always cleaning up after your partner, they're going to stop cleaning up after themselves. If you start doing everything for mom, dad, or grandma Tilly, they're going to stop doing it for themselves because they're going to create this kind of dependency on you. And coming from somebody who's cared for somebody in late life, trust me, you don't want to create a dependency, because what really keeps people thriving is that sense of personal autonomy, that sense of, I've got this, I can do this, I don't need anyone. And that's what keeps them kind of purpose driven and independent. So I just want you to pause for a minute, if you would, and just ask yourself, what is your view on aging? Do you fear it? Do you dread it? Do you consider it to be a time of peace and productivity? Like you're going to get to do all the things you've always wanted to do? Or do you think about aging like you're going to get sick and you're going to be sad and you're going to be needy? How do you look at it? And then my other question is, who in your world is older? Who are your role models that are older right now? Are they sick, or are they well and active? Are they aging the way you want to age? So I talk a lot to my seniors, and a lot of them will say, well, I made it past my parents' age. And that seems to be a big thing that people look at. They're like, okay, mom passed at this age, dad passed at this age. And then if they make it past that age, they go, okay, I'm in the free and clear now. At least I made it that long. It's almost like we assume that our longevity is going to be dependent on when our parents' longevity was. But again, that has to do with choices and decisions, right? One of the biggest concerns, though, that I hear from older adults is that they feel invisible. They don't feel seen. And what ends up happening to their psyche is that they just feel like they don't matter anymore. Like their opinion isn't valuable or even considered, or their wisdom and their years of experience are lost on those around them. And I think I would venture to say this is especially true here in the United States, where we don't turn to our elders to gain wisdom. We tend as a society to look at aging as people getting sick and frail and maybe even being a burden. So let's kind of, here's a fact about ageism or aging right now. By 2050, the world's population aged 60 and over is expected to double to nearly 2 billion. So we're going to go from 12 to 22% of the world's population from 2015 to 2050. And yet, one in two people, according to the World Health Organization, still hold ageist attitudes and stereotypes toward older adults. So we have got to find a way to reshift or to rethink and change the narrative on this, because we're all heading that direction. And we really, as we get older, I'm sure that we want to be treated a certain way. So, ageist stereotypes and beliefs just basically overgeneralize the characteristics of a population, and they contribute to these negative assumptions about cognitive and physical capacities, also social skills and other characteristics. So, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the impact on well being. When the world at large basically says, okay, this is what you're going to be like physically, cognitively, emotionally when you get X age. What happens to your brain and your cognition when you keep getting these messages incoming about how you're going to be at a certain age? So let me ask you first. I asked you this kind of earlier, but I want to kind of rephrase this a little bit. When you think about aging, do you think about declining or do you think about growing? So a lot of times people think about declines and losses, like physical and psychological changes, like, oh, they're going to get wrinkles, or oh, they're going to get forgetful, or they're going to get chronic disease. Or they think about personality traits like, oh, all old people are stuck in their ways. Or they think about loss, like, oh, when you get older, you're going to lose people that you love. But then there's a group of people who think about gains and growth. So they think about things like, I'm going to have so much more freedom of time and financial resources. I'm going to have patience. I'm going to have dignity. I'm going to have so much more maturity and wisdom. And I'm going to have more liberties in terms of like financial resources and time. Who doesn't love that? So when we talk about ageism and the impact on well-being, we can look at it as kind of implicit or explicit biases. Okay, so implicit versus explicit ageism. So ageism can be implicit, where we make assumptions about older adults. Like we assume that they're frail, they're inactive, they're going to get tired easily, they're going to be prone to pain. Or it can be explicit, where our actions and our practices reflect these stereotypes. For example, let's say that a fitness professional has a stereotypical image of an older adult exercise. And so they guide all older adults to engage in low intensity, mild forms of exercise, no matter what. Everybody needs to do low intensity, mild forms. That's more of an explicit form of ageism. But then there's also, when you think about implicit or explicit, there's also self-imposed versus other directed ageism. So Self-imposed ageism is when older adults attribute their physical and mental changes to their age. And guess what? Research supports that when they do this, they decline more rapidly. So it would be like if I had self-imposed ageism, it would be like, oh, yeah, I always forget, it's my age. Or I can't bend down anymore without my knees creaking. It's just my age. So that's more like self imposed, where I get all these incoming messages from society. Therefore, I have to live out what society says I'm going to live out because it gets up in here. And then I start to buy into the narrative. And then other directed ageism is when other people stereotype or they discriminate against older adults. And that's even more common. So I want to take a pause for a minute and give you a minute to reflect on this whole ageism thing and how you look at aging and how you see yourself in the future 5 years, 10 years, 30 years from now. What are your best hopes as you go through the aging process? And then I'm going to reset. So, my name is Angie Miller, and this is Strong Mind, Strong Body. And I'm talking about ageism and some of the negative assumptions and what we can do for healthier bodies and healthier minds if we let go of these stereotypes. So, we've talked about implicit and explicit, self imposed versus other directed. So, here's the thing, research supports that when other directed ageism becomes self imposed, that's where we internalize it. So that means that we're going to take negative age stereotypes and we're going to internalize them and they're going to become self fulfilling. So that's negatively going to impact cognitive performance. So, if you have anyone in your family who has ever passed from a dementia related disease, I know I do. And statistically, most of us are going to have somebody at some point that's going to be very, very close to us, whether it be a family member or whether it be a very close friend's mother or sister or aunt or grandma. Most of us statistically are going to be affected by that. But when I think about this stereotype, it's actually called stereotype embodiment theory, where I embody the stereotype and I start to buy in and it becomes part of me. So when I think about that, I think about having had a parent who passed from a dementia related disease. It would be like every time I forget something, my mind going, oh my gosh, what if I get it? What if I get it? So for me personally, I work very hard against not embodying that stereotype and not assuming that if somebody in my family had it, I must have to get it then. Because I really don't believe that. I really believe that somewhere along the way, somebody was always the first and somebody could be the last. So when we buy in, when older adults, that stereotype embodiment theory, when they buy into those stereotypes that society perpetuates, it leads to this self fulfilling cascade of negative repercussions. So, a lot of times, older adults in the research become actually weaker. They become less adaptable to learning and change. They become more psychologically and physically unwell. It affects their confidence, their self-esteem. It compromises their mental health and well-being. So think about it. If all everyone talks about is you getting older or, what it means to get older and all the incoming messages are negative, it's going to be really hard not to embody that and not to automatically assume that aging is all going to be negative. But I'm here to tell you that I teach at a continuing care retirement community, CCR, and the average age, I think, is 85, 84. They are the most fulfilled, energetic, hilarious, cognitively sound group you could ever hope to meet. Their stories are amazing. They are not embodying that stereotype. They are living in a culture of aging people. And so nobody is walking around going, oh, it stinks to get old. They're all walking around exploring, being curious, listening to one another, and appreciating that they can age together. So the thing about that is that when when people do embody as older adults, if they do embody that stereotype, it has detrimental effects on their physical and mental health. It also increases their risk of chronic conditions and it increases their mortality. So, ageism negatively impacts social engagement for those older adults who are already more susceptible to social isolation and loneliness. So for me, I look at these like CCRC communities, these continuing care communities, and I say, sign me up. Because again, I see older adults who are surrounded by a community of people who are also aging. So they're not buying into all these stereotypes. They're buying into being social, having community, playing bridge, taking fitness classes, doing all the fun things together, kind of like kids in college do when they're in their 20s. It's this community of like-minded people. Because here's a fact. This is, the research says that loneliness increases dementia risk by 50% and stroke risk by 30% and overall mortality by 26%. So we really need to encourage older adults to be socially active and engaged so that the quality of their human relationships is really, really sound. And so whatever we can do to help them get away from these negative age stereotypes about themselves so that they don't have a shorter lifespan and so that they don't have higher levels of stress. So let's talk about ageism in the fitness industry for a minute, because this is where I really, really see it, right? With these class names. Picture somebody who's really, really physically fit. Just imagine someone in your mind, somebody that you can think of that is really physically fit, and kind of describe them in your mind in great detail, right? However you want to describe them, whether you're thinking about their physique or their strength or whatever it is. And I have a question. Were they over the age of 60? So I'm going to guess that many of you might have gone there because we're talking about ageism. So maybe you did visualize somebody older, but I bet a large portion of you visualize somebody younger. We know that physical activity is arguably our most promising, non-pharmacological, non-invasive, cost-effective way to stay healthy. Yet statistically, only about 20% of adults meet the physical activity recommended guidelines for aerobic and strength training. And this drops to 12.7% for those 65 and older. So imagine if we're always talking to them about how they're going to get old, they're going to get frail, they're going to get sick, they're not going to be able to do all the things. What would inspire them to try to go to the gym and take a class or to get a trainer? Okay. So keep in mind that, if we really want to promote healthy behavior for older adults, and I hope that we do, because again, we're all going to become older and we are getting older. Keep in mind that individuals with more positive perceptions of aging, who perceived the aging as more favorable or felt younger, they were healthier. They had improved functional health and physical performance. They had a faster walking speed and they lived longer than those with negative perceptions. So I would encourage all of us, the next time you see an older adult, talk to them like you talk to everybody. Have the same expectations, treat them with respect, but just assume that they can do something unless they tell you otherwise. So how do we shift the narrative on aging? And I want to focus especially on fitness, okay? Because at the end of the day, strong mind, strong body, I am here to promote a healthy mind and a healthy body. So how do we shift the narrative on best practices for age-inclusive fitness services? And I have some tips for you. Number one, I think we need to adopt a personalized multi-component approach to physical activity. In other words, research supports that this personalized multi-component approach means that we encourage everyone, especially older adults, to incorporate activity into their everyday life versus saying, oh, you can only get fit if you go to the gym, or you can only get fit if you take a senior exercise class. Just focus on everyday activity, integrating movement into everyday life routines. So, an example would be just encouraging older adults to walk and maybe walk as a community, encouraging them to ride a bike as long as they can, to park at a spot further from the door, to when they get together with friends, to do walking activities or movement activities. And just keeping in mind that a multi-component approach is also being more strategic in motivation, because to tell older adults, oh, this is going to get you, big guns and tight buns, it's like, pretty sure that's not very motivating for them. But instead, this will help you play with your grandkids. This will give you more energy throughout the day. I think another way that we can promote age inclusive fitness services is to promote social support and physical activity. So that means encouraging group classes, encouraging, again, group walks, encouraging mentors, coaches, just so that we can increase enjoyment through movement and then therefore improve outcomes. Another one is that I think for older adults, we need to recognize the perceived barriers, these negative, self defeating attitudes and misconceptions about getting older. That's a lot of what's keeping older adults from exercising. It's because a lot of trainers, a lot of fitness instructors have this perception that they're not going to be able to do things. And maybe they're scared of working with older adults, so they almost discourage them from joining the community of classes. But what if you just let them make their own decisions and give it their best shot? And then you can guide them afterwards if they feel like that didn't work for them. So keep in mind that beliefs, when older adults buy into that, age related declines are inevitable and irreversible, then that is going to be a mental barrier for them, because they've got it in their mind that they can't reverse aging. They've got it in their mind that it's going to get in their way. But I think we can convince them otherwise if we can show them and empower them through movement. I've had so many older adults work with me and take my classes. And then initially, they had all these perceived barriers that they weren't going to be able to move well, or that they're not strong enough. And then in working with me, I'm able to shift the narrative and say, what if you're stronger than you think? What if you can move more efficiently than you realize? And then giving them opportunities to succeed. So, a lot of studies demonstrate that those who have little confidence in their abilities or believe that they have little control over their outcome, they're going to put forth less effort. They're not going to be as inclined to use problem solving strategies. They're probably going to be more anxious and less task focused. And they're probably going to engage in fewer behaviors like exercise, because in their mind, they don't believe they have control over outcomes. They just believe that if I'm going to get older, it means that I'm probably just going to become deconditioned. So a few other things that I think we can do, we can raise awareness. I think the best weapon against ageism is to raise awareness about the issue and to address the stereotypes and the biases that we all hold, and to really rethink the narrative and ask, is this how I want to be treated when I get older? Okay. And then once we raise awareness, challenge the stereotypes. Challenge ageist stereotypes and myths that perpetuate this negative view of aging, that not all of us are going to be frail and cognitively compromised, and we're not all going to be dependent. And then last but not least, adopt a person-centered approach. This inclusive person-centered approach to fitness programming that says, hey, Angie, you're different from Eric, your producer, from Rick, who's on the other podcast. You're all different. And it's not you turn 50 and you all need to go to Fit Over 50, or you all need to go to Senior Sweat once you turn 60. It is, hey, I'm going to see you as a person. I'm going to look at your abilities, just like I would look at somebody's abilities of a 20 or a 30 or a 40-year-old. And then I'm going to gauge that and help you with programming based on your ability, not your age. So, last but not least, I think we need to recognize the diversity of this population, and we need to tailor programming to a diverse population and not assume that it's a one size fits all approach. So, how about if we get rid of bikini ready, six pack abs, beach body ready, butts and guts, because that kind of language is not going to speak to older adults. It's not going to motivate them. So, get out of the body image based programming and get into the individual based programming, right? A couple other things that I want to leave you with. I just wonder what would happen if we increased our representation of older adults in advertising. What would happen if we put older adults in advertising that weren't compromised, that weren't forgetting where their keys are, or I've fallen and I can't get up? What would happen if we started putting 50, 60, 70-year-olds in advertising and they were fully functional, fully capable, living their best life, exercising, being social, and laughing? Imagine how much we could shift the narrative, right? So let's think about also marketing classes to be more inclusive, using language that speaks to everybody, and then emphasize formal training and education. If you don't have any type of senior specialty, try to take like the NASM senior fitness specialization or get some kind of specialization in working with older adults so that you really do have sound knowledge in helping them. So, again, I'm Angie Miller. I'm really glad you joined me for this talk about ageism because I think it is so important. Again, provided we all, live long enough, we're all going to be subject to ageist stereotypes and prejudices. So, I think it behooves all of us to shift the narrative and to start focusing on age as opportunity, not as something that's going to make us less of who we are today. So thank you so much for joining me. By all means, weigh in with your questions, with your insights. You can reach out on the YouTube videos or you can email me at Angie@angiemillerwellness.com. I'll see you next week.